Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn McCollum, and as the co-chair of the ZSR Library Lecture Series, I'd like to welcome you all to today's lecture. Our guest speaker is Paul Bright, who is the director of the Charlotte and Philip Haynes Gallery here at Wake Forest University. Mr. Bright graduated from the University of South Carolina in Columbia with a BFA. Prior to coming to Wake, Mr. Bright's work experience included graphic design as well as design of exhibitions in interior spaces. He was a conservation assistant performing exhibition design at the South Carolina State Museum. He was also the director of exhibition and design at the Augusta Museum of History, as well as a restoration assistant and a studio art instructor. Additionally, he is a practicing artist who works with the medium of collage, both paper and sound. His work has been exhibited in museums and galleries throughout the United States and in Canada, Germany, England, and Italy. His talk today will present a brief look at the history of artist illustrated letters and a longer discussion of the posted works of James Rosen. This lecture is concurrent with the exhibition at the Haynes Gallery, Ros-en-velopes, which runs until April 1st. So without further ado, Mr. Paul Bright.
First, I would like to thank all of you for coming this afternoon for the talk, which is part of Ros-en-velopes, the exhibition currently at Haynes Gallery. My great appreciation to Carolyn and the ZSR for their openness and support for this and the other talks they host, and to the Humanities Institute for their support of programming related to Ros-en-velopes. Tonight, immediately following my talk, there's an opening at Start Gallery for Showing Promise, work by presidential scholars in art, organized by freshman Devin Gilbert. So we can just roll on down the hill and through the woods for that party. Also, there are two other events related to the exhibition Ros-en-velopes. On March 24th at 7 p.m., Amy Meffam, who is here, from the English Department and Humanities Institute will give a talk in the Haynes Gallery about microfiction at 7 p.m. And on March 31st, the artist James Rosen will be here for a conversation also in the gallery at 5 p.m. I have to tell you that I really did try to stick to the ideas prescribed by the title of this talk, but you will see how I deviate from or play loose with the definition of letter as I proceed. I hope these transgressions lead to some interesting places. But first, a little historical background. In a great act of hubris or optimism, Pioneer 10 in 1972 was launched with this plaque, which to me is clearly both a missive, something you send, and an enclosure, something you send in something else, albeit one intended for an alien observer or reader. It was designed by Carl Sagan, Linda Saltzman-Sagan, and Frank Drake. Three elements are present here that allow me to begin with Pioneer as an unironic and fairly direct example of the artist's letter. An image, artwork, or illustration, sometimes of a work in progress or of a concept, an envelope or package as a missive and a means of conveyance. In this case, the enclosure is not literally enclosed. It's mounted on the outside of the craft, and while the vehicle and means of conveyance are the same, it does fulfill the necessary requirements. The Pioneer in its graphic message might seem as quixotic and naively charming as a child sending a letter to Santa Claus. And maybe that's an excellent metaphor for this act of the human species. But the spacecraft perhaps represents the physical, material missive at its apogee before the full digitization of communication. It is a posting, an open letter of introduction from us to the universe. Open letters are likely the first that were posted, that is, put up in public places or published in a tabloid. But they generally follow a conceit. They are often written as though addressing an individual, while actually intending to reach a much wider audience, like a stage whisper. Full-page open letters can still sometimes be found in publications like the New York Times, advocating for a group or against another. Letters to the editor and Martin Luther's 95 Theses, seen here in a slightly later copy, posted on the church door in Wittenberg, are each a kind of open letter. But to get to enclosed letters, we're going to go back downrange, way back to the beginning of mail. The first known envelopes developed soon after the first writing. By about 3000 BC, Sumerians were sending little clay packets with another clay piece inside, like a nut in its shell. Each contained the same text for cross-verification of the message, usually a business or a legal document. A Sumerian clay envelope is a little like a Pioneer space probe, something sent from another place and time into the void. Probably in both cases, the objects were sent on a deliberate mission of high seriousness and import, and they are both missives with enclosures, with messages from lost or to hypothetical civilizations. Sending physical mail, whether by satellite, clay object, or stamped envelope, is committing it to an active trajectory in the space-time continuum. Terrestrial mail is subject to some of the same perils as objects in interstellar space. There are asteroid collisions and black holes. However, to discuss the artist's letter more specifically, I'm going to perform my first cheat by starting with a precursor, the artist's journal. With the availability of paper in the late Middle Ages and its relative ubiquity by the Renaissance, artists were able to record their observations and ideas by writing and drawing in notebooks and journals. These are pages from Leonardo's sketchbooks. A shopping list by Michelangelo, allegedly for an illiterate servant, and a page from Thomas Jefferson's journal on the right. Appropriately, Jefferson's describes making pasta, and the illustration is of a press from which spaghetti-like deliciousness is extruded. While many of these were kept for private use or to share in studios or workshops, journals show some of the hallmarks of the artist's letter, but without the intention, initially, of being sent to anyone. Even non-artists, before the invention of the camera, often had adequate drawing skills to record the world around them. This is from the journals of Meriwether Lewis from the Lewis and Clark expedition. But for the artist's letter, as I'm defining it, a missive containing both text, or its echoes, and image, we need to get to the historical moment when mail and postal systems were developed. Turnataxis began as mail carriers in Italy in the 1400s, and were soon providing a Habsburg-subsidized postal service throughout the Holy Roman Empire. In the 19th century, they were awarded a franchise to carry mail throughout the German-speaking world. This slide shows the evolution of the post horn image, which Turnataxis used as a kind of logo, morphing into the recent German postal logo. And here are some of the current socialite descendants of the House of Turnataxis in a party mood. And this is for Jake Hurley, who seems to think I should be more in touch with pop culture. The literati among you may recall that Thomas Pynchon's Crying of Lot 49 was constructed around the fiction of a suppressed history of Turnataxis' rival postal system, Tristero, a surreptitious anti-establishment meta-mail. Physical mail was still of existential importance in the 60s. The slide of the book cover shows an image of a graffito of a muted post horn. Other mostly government-supported postal systems began to emerge in the Enlightenment, but they were usually used for exceptional documents. Even when their use became more widespread, they were generally COD services, and recipients had a propensity of not paying for the receipt of the document. These were stamped for delivery, and the term held while the particular system changed. The folded envelope and adhered prepaid postage that is familiar to us really began in 1840 with Queen Victoria's Royal Mail and the penny black stamp. This system also exemplified and encouraged an important shift to using the post as a public means of conveying increasingly private information. The privacy and intrusion standards eventually enacted for postal security were more advanced and generally more observed than those for email, as we have recently discovered. In the quest to make everything faster and more convenient, we've also made everything easier. In the U.S. in the 19th century, the Pony Express existed as a relay courier system for transcontinental mail for about a year and a half, beginning in 1860. It was eclipsed by an encoded hybrid electronic mail system, the telegraph. Almost every kind of conveyance has been used to transport or transmit mail. Pigeons, horse-drawn carriages, feet, horses, trains, cars, trucks, airplanes, boats, submarines, and electrons. Mail carrying was also more of a glamour profession at one time. In the early days, there were songs and celebrations for the mail. Now there are fewer paeans to the post. Nothing in the E-world to rival Mozart's post-horn serenade or even Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes in 1961, and Jay, covered by the Beatles in 1963. No ode to email since You've Got Mail in 1998 at its giddy beginning before it consumed us. We were all so young and innocent then. With the development of postal systems and increasing travel, the 19th century saw a flowering of the true artist's letter. This slide shows Delacroix's letter to a paint manufacturer. I wonder if you could make it out. And a letter to Baudelaire. Here are two letters from Manet, and three more from Manet. Be nice to get one of those. Among the most famous, of course, are Van Gogh's beautifully drawn letters to his brother Theo, whose contents range from descriptions of hardship and the intensity of his work to pleas for money, as well as images of his paintings transcribed as drawings. Especially the Van Gogh letters to artist Emile Bernard were often illustrated with drawings that included specific indications of color as notations for or records of finished paintings. They're highly descriptive, highly detailed, and really beautifully drawn. Even if he had created only these drawings, we would know him, I think. And here are several more. It's also interesting to see how he uses the page in any way he needed to. And these cover the span of his development as an artist, as you can see from the stylistic changes as well. Picasso's late analytical cubist painting Majoli can be considered an open, if oblique, love letter, encoded specifically within a public posting to his girlfriend, Marcel Humbert. The title is taken from a popular music hall song, meaning roughly, "My pretty girl." Nothing yet to do with Angelina. One calligram letter from Apollinaire on the left, and one from Jean Cocteau on the right. A Leonora Carrington letter on the left, and another Cocteau on the right. Many modern artists composed artist letters. Here are three from Matisse, a Sonia Delaunay, one to Breton. Oops, go back. That one. Very simple message. An O'Keeffe and a Kandinsky. And here an Eros Saarinen and an Alexander Calder. Here a Beatrix Potter, a Louise Bourgeois, and an Edward Gorey. And again Gorey with Patti Smith. And here a Picasso, and a Picasso to Gertrude Stein, and a Maurice Sendak. Here are two artists from the contemporary artist Richard Tuttle, and two more showing interesting shifts in writing depending upon the recipient or the purpose of the letter. I'll go back for a second. You can see how his handwriting changes drastically from one to the next depending what he's trying to convey, and I guess who he's conveying it to. In some cases, not native English speakers. Even Kurt Schwitter's collage work from the 1920s through the 40s, which was rarely conceived as male-born art, barely needed to in order to qualify, with its frequent postcard scale and profusion of stamps and references to mailing. Here we have a card, and next to it a collage called Open by Customs, and you can see all the postal stamps and indications on the collage itself. There is also a huge body of mailed art by unknown makers from the 19th and 20th centuries. And here's several more showing vitality, obsessiveness, and stylistic range. By the mid-20th century, many artists had for some time been writing letters containing images, but artists also started sending correspondence that was itself intentionally art, or a conscious hybrid of letter and art. On the left side is a Joseph Beuys correction of fluxus definitions, and an anonymous piece on the right, but no dead hair in this case, just a distressed cat. With the mail art movement and fluxus beginning in the late 1950s, and especially through practitioners like Ray Johnson, postal art became a conceptual as well as physical or aesthetic undertaking, and a considerable degree of irreverent funk is not uncommon in these. Unlike James Rosen's work, which is intended to be personal and specific to the recipient, mail artworks were intentional postings in a quasi-public sense. They were literally collaborative, each asking for additions and resendings, their circuitous peregrinations very much a part of their reason for being, a sort of ongoing postal-based happening. Now I'm going to do something a little weird, perhaps. In addition to using the term artist letters with some flexibility, as I have been, I'm going to connect two disparate artists across time, media, form, through the work of James Rosen. This will also entail the suspension of a kind of evaluative faculty on our part, the kind that has become accustomed to always elevating certain creators and creations, and instead admitting art and artists of smaller reputations on the same level, understanding that, in part, it is arbitrary acts of history that place these elements in one category or the other. In one of those felicitous coincidences that sometimes surround exhibition planning, as I was preparing for the Ros-en-velopes show to open here, two exhibitions in New York took place that allowed me to conceive of Rosen's work in a new and hopefully illuminating context. Emily Dickinson and Anne Reinhardt are perhaps not a likely pairing, or at least the most obvious. But James Rosen and Emily Dickinson share a great affinity of sensibility, as do some of the approaches and intentions of Rosen and Reinhardt. Seeing all this work in close succession allowed me to form connections between them, with Rosen's work as a nexus. Recently, there has been a considerable attention given to Emily Dickinson's poems that were not tied together into what she called fascicles. These unbound, mostly later poems were written on carefully chosen fragments and pieces of paper, as well as advertisements and newspaper, and on envelopes torn, cut, or splayed open with a casualness that is only seeming. Here, she uses postal detritus for composing her own missive. Her use of materials was not just an expression of New England parsimony, any more than Kurt Schwitter's collages reflect only a relative paucity of conventional art materials. With the poem's frequent alternate word choices, written on reclaimed material, there is also a provisional quality to her poetry at this time, too. But the assiduousness with which she chose her paper echoes the attention given to the lines and words, which are laid down with sensitivity to the shapes, contours, features, and topography of the paper substrate. Rosen pays similar attention to the materials he collects and adheres to his envelopes, to the paper he writes on and the relationship of the elements. He has always responded to the poetry of Dickinson. It is sometimes included in his mailings. And here, with their envelopes and enclosures, they seem to meet in important ways. The written language often takes on a concretely visual quality in many instances of both of their writing, where how it looks as marks on paper is nearly as important as the content it conveys, as in these examples. Here, where he overwrites and draws on a printed sheet or makes geometric forms with words, where she rotates the open envelope 45 degrees and plays off the dynamic geometry. Or here, where she subtly echoes the envelope and Rosen overwrites his own text as if playing with a found object. His writing bounces off the cancellations and stamps. Dickinson's work is known for a high degree of compression, for often putting her finger on the pulse of the universe in a few lines. Look back on time with kindly eyes. He doubtless did his best. How softly sinks his trembling sun in human nature's west. Rosen's work, written or painted, frequently does the same through distillation or juxtaposition. As in the right image, conjuring a very early Manhattan from a map in whimsically added element, like an antler, and where the deer did once play. And Dickinson inserts a triangle into two she has already explored. These examples of Rosen's and Dickinson's work, often aphoristic in form and scale, can seem hermetic in the way Vermeer can seem hermetic, involuted works that reveal a high degree of uncanny observation and sensitivity to the world, processed at the level of the personal, even the eccentric in this case, and the intimate. It makes perfect sense that Vermeer and Van Leeuwenhoek, the refiner of the microscope, were possibly associates. Dickinson, Rosen, Vermeer, Leeuwenhoek, all close observers of the world who avoid solipsism by using the intimate to function as filter and metaphor for larger concerns of longer duration than one moment, one work, one life, one time. As Josiah McElhenney writes in the catalog of the Drawing Center's recent show of Dickinson's poetry fragments, many of her poems were missives for an audience, a reader of one. Just as Rosen has said that his sole intention was to get a specific message in a hybrid missive of word and image to that one recipient. And indeed, many of Dickinson's poems appeared as letters or in letters to others. The distinction between artist journal letters and with the intervention of obnoxious curators such as myself, of public and private, blurs. Dickinson can be seen trying out variations of ideas in these poem letters, and the same can be seen in Rosen's envelopes and enclosures, where images and ideas recur sometimes in series with slight restatements and tweaking. But these coincidences and correspondences can only be discerned when a critical mass of the missives are collected and seen as they were never intended to be. Reinhardt and James Rosen share a little common history. Both showed at the iconic Betty Parsons Gallery. Both were students of the important art historian Meyer Shapiro, who also served as a mentor and friend of Rosen's. Both read and were influenced by George Kubler's 1962 book, The Shape of Time. What is it with the 60s? Both eschewed trends, even if their work briefly crossed the contrail of one. They both have had a profound sense of art throughout time, not just of their time. They have seen their work as partaking of artistic influences of deep temporality. And in these images of Reinhardt's paintings from the 60s, you may just be able to discern the subtleties this work can only really convey in person, but not really. The sense of time beyond the confines of one's own also connects these painters to Dickinson's poetry and complicates the modernist imperative to make it new, to be absolutely of one's own time, or even a little ahead of it. I'm going to quote from Holland Cotter's review of the recent exhibition I've referred to, and where the last two images now have come from, of Reinhardt's late black paintings at David Zwirner, because his words could be applied to certain of the paintings of James Rosen as well, including two in our current exhibition. So Holland Cotter with paintings by James Rosen. From a distance, they look like the most withholding, shut-down things possible, all but unphotographable and deliberately so. They require two things of an interested viewer: to be present and be willing to spend time. Stay a while, concentrate, and details emerge. A whisper of color, a specter of geometry. The paintings, it turns out, are alive, vibrant even. In effect, they generate the alternative reality, a state of psychic awareness, a perception of purity that Reinhardt asked of abstraction, and found in certain non-Western art. Rosen has stated that his art is intended for the capable observer. With that capability being the quality of quiet, patient concentration, the receptivity which Cotter describes. In a cynical moment, I wrote to Rosen that these days there must be at least 5 such capable observers. As Rosen has said of his role as an artist, part of his purpose is to pick up a signal from the past and send it down. Sounds like light from a star, or a letter in the mail that, unlike emails, texts, and tweets, do not reach us in the near real time of their creation, but only after a delay. What is unreal time? We've come to resent delay, but it is important. Things take the time they take. These artists have created a slow art like slow food, an art of time. Rosen's paintings frequently begin with saturated hues that are subsumed in many layers of oil-wax emulsion. They engage intentionally and directly with time. Some colors will gradually become more pronounced as certain others become increasingly transparent and migrate as they age. Perhaps they will eventually approach the original intensity of the first applied layers. These are paintings as a sort of mandala, with their own karmic cycle, different in form but perhaps not in intention from this Reinhardt cartoon. Rosen's work certainly hints at the mystical, an echo of Malevich and Kandinsky. In addition to what some would say are inscrutable paintings, Reinhardt held non-happenings, typologically organized slideshows demonstrating the continuity of forms in art, repeated and segueing throughout the world and throughout history. A year before Alan Kaprow's happenings, they were a sort of inverse performance art. But more germane to our discussion, he created a large body of cartoons, once seen as marginal, but which form an important part of his output. Jim Rosen's envelopes and letters have some but not all the same purpose that Reinhardt's more polemical cartoons do. But before this discussion becomes altogether too serious, I need to emphasize the particular humor of many of these works and artists, even or especially where it mixes with their didactics. So here we have a Seurat joke on the lower left that does tell us something about the artist and his drawings. You probably cannot read it from there. Both artists came of age in the pre-televisual height of the newspaper comic, the funny, as an early culturally shared American pop form. Of course, a little later, Roy Lichtenstein and other pop artists were using comics, but past their heyday, just as television burgeoned in our culture. And here are Felix the Cat and his bro Kylix by Rosen. So the original cartoon on top and then Jim's take on the bottom. Rosen's letters sometimes, and Reinhardt's cartoons often, are clear examples of the epistle, a missive with didactic intent. But Reinhardt's cartoons were not a private channel of communication, but a public utterance. On the right, we can see a rare Rosen public utterance, an editorial on an envelope. And to return to Emily Dickinson in a more editorializing moment herself, there are those who are shallow intentionally and only profound by accident. Like something smart from a 19th century New England fortune cookie. Reinhardt's cartoons were published in periodicals and magazines like the leftist PM, where he worked with Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, and the New Masses. He created them in an idiom entirely different from his painting, often using collage, whereas Rosen's mailed works often do overlap approaches and aesthetics with that of his exhibited paintings. And here we have Reinhardt's How to Look at Modern Art in America, next to Alfred Barr's earlier famous flowchart for MoMA and modernism. However, the cartoons and the missives both have allowed their respective artists to share, test, and convey ideas more directly to a chosen audience, whereas the painted work intentionally avoids didactics, over-specificity, and directed messages. The paintings open up slowly but elusively. Reinhardt's cartoon, How to Look at Looking, here next to Mad Magazine and sharing some of its stylistic attributes, could be a Rosen didactic, emphasizing looking as the aware version of seeing. Both Rosen's and Reinhardt's paintings reflect a pre-pop sensibility that retains mediumistic focus and integrity, regardless of the influences and ideas synthesized in them. They are not mashups or collages, as the missives and cartoons sometimes are. In a conventional reading, their paintings could be seen as their public utterances or statements, as their open letters, their postings in the original sense. But if we acknowledge their awareness of the special circumstances of their paintings not just of their time, but also alluding to big T time, requiring an investment of time on the viewer's part for their reception, the fact that they are not reducible to images and must be seen to be experienced, then we see also that these works, while intended for public display, reach their recipients more intimately and privately than perhaps most modern paintings do, more as Dickinson's poetry and her fragments do. And this scrambles a neat reading of the small, intimate letters only binarily related to public, large paintings. Maybe Robert Motherwell was edging up to this when he argued that it was large-scale paintings that were the most intimate because they can seem to envelop you in an experience akin to the sublime. This is readily apparent when you are as close to a Pollock as a museum guard will allow. I realized that I have followed a convoluted path to track the mail, ending up with correspondence and letters, less strictly defined, but in complex relationships to these artists' other works. I hope it will encourage you to take a close look at the work in the current exhibition, and that what I've said might allow you to see that range of work as a singular part of a web of continuity. Thank you.